What would you do if the sky just stopped? At 41,000 feet over central Canada, a nearly new Boeing 767 is slicing through the upper atmosphere. The cabin hums with the familiar white noise of jet engines until it doesn't. The sound fades. Cockpit screens dim. The air turns unnaturally quiet. And a veteran captain, who usually flies gliders for fun on his days off, realizes he's now flying the biggest glider of his life, with 69 souls on board, aiming for a runway he's never practiced on, because it technically isn't even a runway anymore. Tonight, we step inside the cockpit of Air Canada, Flight 143, better known to aviation history as the Gimli glider. On July 23rd, 1983, a routine transcontinental flight from Montreal via Ottawa to Edmonton turns into one of the most unbelievable, non-fatal incidents in commercial aviation. Air Canada's Boeing 767 is the new flagship of the fleet. Digital flight deck, fuel-efficient engines, automation that trims the classic three-person cockpit down to just 2 pilots. Fewer crew, fewer analog gauges, more computer logic. On paper, it represents the future of safe, efficient air travel. But Flight 143 isn't a story about one dramatic explosion or a visible mechanical failure. It's about something much quieter and more dangerous. Tiny assumptions, invisible gaps in responsibility, and a country caught mid-transition between pounds and kilograms. It's about mental math with shaking hands, systems quietly failing in the background, and a captain reaching beyond the textbook, tapping into his glider instincts to make a modern airliner do something airliners are not meant to do: glide, unpowered, to a survivable landing. Why does this matter to us? Because every smooth landing you've watched from a window seat is the final link in a chain. Procedures, training, engineering, and human judgment. When enough links weaken at once, you find out what truly holds the system together: skill, leadership, and calm under pressure. By the end of this video, you'll know how a state-of-the-art jet quietly ran itself out of fuel, how a decommissioned airbase turned racetrack ended up beneath its flight path, and what the aviation world changed afterward, so that the next time the sky goes silent, the story can still end on the ground in one piece. The first cracks in a normal day, cruising smoothly near the Ontario-Manitoba border. Flight 143 seems perfectly routine. Then, a chime. A fuel pressure warning appears. It's concerning but not yet catastrophic. Low fuel pressure can mean many things: a pump issue, a sensor glitch, or a transient anomaly. The crew checks systems, prepares to divert toward Winnipeg if necessary, but there's no sense of impending disaster. Then the left engine winds down. Not a rough sputter, just a quiet, terrifying rundown. Seconds later, the right engine follows. In the span of moments, the unthinkable happens: a dual-engine flameout at cruise altitude. Almost instantly, the cockpit undergoes a massive power failure. Screens go dark. Autopilot is gone. The aircraft's brain, the 2 turbofan engines, has shut down. What remains is a last resort lifeline. A small ram air turbine drops into the slipstream, spinning in the rushing air to generate just enough power for a handful of vital instruments and limited hydraulics. The high-tech Boeing 767 has just been downgraded to a very heavy, very unforgiving glider. Artificial horizon, airspeed, altitude, compass. That's it. There is no time for panic. Captain Robert Pearson takes a breath and resets his reality. This isn't a jet anymore. This is a glider with swept wings, a lot of weight, and no second chances. Whether he says it out loud or only in his mind, the new mission is clear. We're a glider now. The invisible chain. How do you run out of fuel? At 41,000 feet, how does a modern wide-body run completely out of fuel mid-flight? The story starts long before the flameout on the ground, with a faulty fuel quantity indication system, FQIS, that had been acting up before Flight 143 ever took off. The fix was deferred, as regulations allow, switching ops to manual fuel management. That meant going old school, using dripsticks to measure fuel level in centimeters, converting that depth to volume, then converting volume to fuel weight for the flight plan. On its own, this isn't a problem. Airlines did these calculations for decades. But this is Canada in the early 1980 seconds, a country in the middle of converting from imperial to metric. The aircraft's systems, performance tables, and the Boeing documentation all expect kilograms. Many ground personnel, habits, and mental models still live in pounds. Somewhere in that handoff, a single conversion factor is misapplied. A number that should represent kilograms is treated as pounds. The calculations say, fuel loaded, good to go. The reality? The aircraft leaves with roughly half the fuel required for the westbound leg. Layer onto that. The 767's new two-crew cockpit design has removed the flight engineer, the person traditionally focused on systems like fuel management, especially in abnormal conditions. Responsibility for fuel oversight is now distributed less clearly defined, more vulnerable to assumption. No one piece of this chain feels like a disaster on its own. But together, they prime Flight 143 for a silent, invisible crisis that doesn't reveal itself until the aircraft is already committed high over the Canadian plains. A glide that shouldn't be possible. With both engines dead, Winnipeg becomes an idea, not a destination. Air traffic control, watching the 767's primary radar return and using basic geometry, quickly realizes the hard truth. The aircraft doesn't have the glide distance to make it. First Officer Maurice Quintal searches his memory. Long before this job, he flew for the Royal Canadian Air Force. Somewhere north of their track, there's an old RCAF base, Gimli. He remembers long runways, concrete, space. He suggests it. The crew turns. There's just one catch. The runway Quintal remembers, runway 32 liters, is no longer an active runway. Gimli has been partially converted into a motor racing facility. On the ground that day are campers, families, children on bicycles, motorsports enthusiasts. It's a festival atmosphere, the opposite of what you'd expect under the glide path of a crippled airliner. No one on the ground hears the jet coming. There are no engines to warn them. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the list of problems grows. With the engines out, hydraulic pressure is limited, restricting flight control authority and spoiling the ability to use flaps and normal speed brakes the way they were designed. The crew performs a gravity gear extension, the main gear lockdown, but the nose gear fails to indicate locked. With no flaps, the aircraft's stall speed is much higher, forcing a fast approach. And they are too high and too fast for a standard glide profile into Gimli. This is the moment where pure stick and rudder instinct takes over. Pearson reaches for something from his glider experience, something never intended for a 767, a forward slip. He banks the aircraft sharply and crosses the controls, turning the wide fuselage into a massive air brake. The airplane presents its side to the relative wind, trading altitude for drag without building excessive speed. The jet shudders. Control forces feel different. From the cabin, passengers on one side see more sky than ground. On the other side, they see the Earth rushing up at a disturbing angle. But the gamble is working. The glide path steepens without overspeeding. At precisely the right moment, Pearson rolls the Boeing wings level, aligns with a makeshift runway ahead, and commits. Touchdown on a racetrack. The 767 crosses the threshold of Gimli's runway-turned racetrack, still fast and heavy. With no flaps, it touches down around 800 feet beyond the threshold, the main gear taking the hit first. Tires blow. The sound inside the cabin is like gunshots. The aircraft's energy has to go somewhere. Almost on cue, the unluckiest part of the landing becomes one of its saving graces. The nose gear collapses. Instead of pitching them into chaos, the scraping metal and shower of sparks create massive drag, acting like an improvised brake. Inside the cockpit, Pearson uses rudder input to keep the sliding aircraft as straight as possible, threading a path between parked vehicles, light poles, and horrified spectators. Two young boys on bicycles, frozen at first by the surreal sight of a silent wide-bodied jet bearing down on them, scramble out of the way in time. Finally, the motion stops. The airplane comes to rest. No post-impact fire, no fatalities. A fully loaded, powerless Boeing 767 has just landed on a racetrack without a single life lost. It is, in every practical sense, a miracle engineered by human hands. Human factors are part of the system, not outside it. The move from a 3-person to a 2-person cockpit reduced complexity and cost, but it also removed a dedicated system specialist. In abnormal situations like manual fuel management, gaps in role clarity become dangerous. Responsibility must be explicit, not assumed. Unit conversions are never just numbers. Liters, pounds, kilograms, these are not academic distinctions. A single mistaken conversion factor erased the margin of safety in a brand new jet. In high reliability domains, obvious numbers must be visible, cross-checked, and questioned. Procedures need guardrails for abnormal ops. Deferring maintenance is normal and allowed. But when a deferred system forces crews into manual calculations, the organization must respond with dedicated checklists, training, and redundant verification steps tailored to that abnormal state. Airmanship still matters when automation disappears. When the screens went dark and the engines died, Flight 143 reverted to the fundamentals: pitch, power without the power, judgment, teamwork, and raw flying skill took over. Quintal's memory of Gimli and Pearson's glider-borne decision to use a forward slip turned an unsurvivable scenario into a controlled landing. Luck helps, but it helps those who are ready. On another day, with slightly different timing or decisions, a silent approach toward a racetrack full of people could have been catastrophic. What made the difference wasn't luck alone. It was a chain of smart choices under stress: energy management, runway selection, control on rollout, and crew coordination. In aviation, the stories that feel like miracles are almost never magic. They're human stories, about people trained to stay composed when most of us would freeze, about organizations learning the hard way that small ambiguities can have huge consequences, and about a culture that treats numbers and procedures with the same respect as gravity. The Gimli glider didn't float down on a wave of good fortune. It came down safely because a captain trusted his instincts and applied a maneuver almost no one expects to see in an airliner. A first officer remembered an old runway that no chart in the cockpit was pointing to, and an entire industry was willing to look at this incident and say, "We can do better." If this story taught you something or made you look at every landing a little differently, consider subscribing for more aviation stories told with detail, heart, and respect for the people inside the cockpit. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which link in this chain surprised you the most? And what does it change about how you think of human error in aviation? Your answer might be the start of the next story we tell.